Hello, I'm U.S. Election Assistance Commissioner Chairman Don Palmer. This panel of election administrators is a part of our virtual video series of lessons learned from the 2020 election, how the pandemic impacted the election, and the different ways America voted. To continue this 2020 Lesson Learned series, I'm pleased to be joined by Leslie Hoffman and Gabrielle Summe, pronounced as I got it correctly, Summe. Leslie Hoffman was appointed to serve as a Yavapai County recorder by the Board of Supervisors on January 1st, 2012, after 23 years in the title industry in Yavapai County. So in November 2012, Ms. Hoffman was elected to the office by the voters and re-elected in November 2016 and November 2020. The recorder oversees voter registration and the maintenance of the county's voter registration rolls, early voting, and the active early voting list. Ms. Hoffman is the president of the Arizona Association of Counties, a member of the Election Officials of Arizona and Election Center. She's a member and immediate past president of the Arizona Association of County Recorders. Now, Gabrielle Summe has made history in 2010 when she was elected as the first female Kenton County clerk. She is the past president of the Kentucky Clerks Association and served on the e-recording task force. Gabrielle attended Chase College of Law, working for the Kenton County Attorney's Office, and became an assistant county attorney after her graduation in 2000. In 2013, she received the Exceptional Service Award from Chase College of Law, and in 2017 was honored as an outstanding woman in Northern Kentucky. Thank you both for speaking with me today. I'm really pleased to have both of you. Let me just jump right into it. How did the pandemic affect your voting, early voting, mail absentee, and election day? And what were some of the significant changes that you as a jurisdiction made to the pandemic?
Let me start. So Kentucky, as everyone historically, now that everybody gets to really look at each state's kind of laws, and that has become more prevalent. In the past, nobody really paid much attention outside your borders, and maybe on a higher level, but not most of the time. We had pretty restrictive laws. So we had very specific time frames where certain things could happen. There was no early voting. You could call it early voting, but it was really absentee voting. But you had to have a reason to be able to vote in advance. And you had only 2 weeks to do that. You could come into the office, you had to sign an affidavit that you were literally out of the county on the day of the election, and then you could vote. And then we, of course, had election day, and that was the pinnacle or the biggest time where everybody would come out. And I am the third largest county in Kentucky. I have 20 cities. I had 105 precincts. So election day is quite the production. So leading up to that, we don't have a lot of absentees. We didn't have a lot of absentees by mail. We had a fair bit of walk-ins because it gave opportunities for people who, due to medical issues or college students or age, disability, or illness, all of those things. That was pretty restrictive. Just to give you an example, in 2016, which was again another presidential election, I had 33,500 ballots to deal with. When we had the primary last year due to the pandemic, I put out 35,000 and processed 26,000 coming back. It was quite the difference. That being said, fast forward to the pandemic, everything changed. We had true early voting, and it was 3 weeks of early voting. And the whole thought process was, your election day, we want election day to look like election day, but to spread people out and all these things, this is what we're going to do. I was part of a group with the county clerks, along with the governor's office and the state board of elections and the secretary of state, to try to figure out what that was going to look like. And given the fact that you have 120 counties in Kentucky, some that are very, very tiny, and then some that are just massive, what size is going to fit all? And so it was a compromise all the way around that it would be a true no excuse. And because they couldn't get around that in Kentucky law, they basically just gave everybody the excuse they could use, which was COVID. And so therefore you still had people kind of, once they went through this portal, they were basically signing an internal affidavit that says, I'm requesting this because due to COVID, I need an absentee ballot. And that's when you notice that the primary itself, I only had one physical location for everybody to vote because they were really encouraging, and everybody across the board was encouraging everybody to vote by mail. And that was massive. And it was no way to contemplate what you were going to do. A lot of people, interestingly enough, really wanted to be involved. So I did have difficulty getting some of my older poll workers because we were encouraged not to use them because of their potential exposures. But I had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork going, what can I do? We want this to work. We want to protect this right. How do we do it? But I had to really figure out how to use my building to the best possible way. So I literally had stations in my basement, in different parts of my office. I basically commandeered all of my other offices. And in Kentucky, your county clerks also do marriage, notary. We do all kinds of other things. So I literally took over my whole office and made everybody in my office work on this and rotate through all the jobs. That being said, primary, 35,000 easily votes going out, 3 weeks of early voting. I had 70% of my vote happen early voting because every county is unique. Mine happens to be more inclined, regardless of party affiliation. They want to vote in person. So the early voting was incredibly popular. I had 2 physical locations. We basically processed 2,000 people every day in both locations. And, the challenges were equipment and everything, but it was such a massive change. But everybody was pretty happy that they could vote in person. And if not, they had the opportunity by ballot. And the state had to quickly put a lot of new technology in place, which was good in the primary, got great for the general. And overall, I think a lot of people just ended up feeling that they were able to do their duty. It was a heavy load for my staff and myself, but I felt really good about it. But it really busted any law that Kentucky had that was restrictive, was completely changed. So that's what happened.
Now, that's amazing. Leslie, tell me generally what happened in your county in Arizona.
Well, Arizona, it never ceases to amaze me how different we all are from state to state. Each law has their own set of rules based on what their citizens want. And we have an early voter list you can sign up for indefinitely. No excuse. We haven't been excused for years. And in my county, which is a lot of retirement, I've got between 165 and 167 registered voters at any time. 80% are on that list and automatically get a ballot for every election that they're qualified to vote in. So for us, it did increase due to the pandemic, but that's all. It's a process that we have been doing for so many years. And knowing that we were going to have an increase, we had a few drop off because of the media and things that were being said out there, but we had a whole lot more increase. We went up by almost 4%. And again, that wasn't that big. And for us, because we do it all the time, it just meant we're going to have a little more. And we said, please get them back to us early. Don't wait till the last minute. And they listened. We got so many ballots, and we have 27 days of early voting here, 27 days prior to the election of early voting. And I have 2 locations, and we had a lot of people, again, because of media. One of the challenges is they're showing up and they have their ballot in their hands they received in the mail and said, but I don't trust this one. I want to vote early in person. So there was an expense involved there because they were getting 2 ballots, but they still had the opportunity to come in, vote early, or use their mail ballot, no excuse. And what I did is I just put out a note to all of my departments around the whole county and said, anybody have any extra time? Come on over and help us process early ballots, because it's a process that we have in place and we've done for so long. We just needed help because of volume. And they did. I had public defenders here. I had all the juvenile probationers came over, board of supervisors, some of their staff came down and helped. And that was that was a really good thing for us. So our challenges was more getting PPEs and just doing, the CDC guidelines. Primary was really tough getting product. By the time the general hit, the product was easy to come by. And our biggest challenge, because of the pandemic, is there was a lawsuit and a judge allowed our voter registration cutoff to continue past our regular cutoff date. So when we would have normally been checking signatures and processing early ballots, we were still processing voter registrations. There was a counter lawsuit that stopped that, but we lost almost 2 weeks there. So we have the parties wanting the reports, seeing what ballots have come in and been processed. We were having a very tough time getting them processed in our normal time because, again, we were still doing voter registration during the time period. We're having ballots flow in by the thousands a day, and at the same time doing voter registration. So that was our biggest challenge. Process-wise, it was just a small increase in what we do for every election. And we end up 87% of our voters voted early for the general.
That's outstanding. And so really what you're saying is you're not only dealing with the pandemic, but also litigation and sort of a shift a little bit in how voters were participating. Amazing that you guys were able to handle this. Now let's break this down a little bit. For in-person voting, and we can start with you, Leslie, first on this one. I know a lot of people in Arizona vote by mail, but in the in-person experience, did you have problems recruiting poll workers or finding polling places with the pandemic? And what worked and what didn't? And then we can go, and then we'll shift over to Gabrielle. But Leslie, did you have problems in this area? And how was it different this year versus, let's say, 2 or 4 years ago with your vote centers or your election or early voting?
In the primary election, we lost a lot of our poll workers because we do have, like I say, we're a very large retirement community, so older. Gabe had talked about that a little bit earlier. So we did have a lot of them drop out. We didn't lose any polling places or vote centers, which was very fortunate. Probably the biggest challenge we had were the difference of opinions. I want to wear a mask all the time. I don't want to work with someone who doesn't. But we had that. Then we have a very large county. We're 8,200 square miles, and we encompass a lot of cities, very, very much like Gabe's. And every city had their own mandates. So that was a challenge of, do you have to wear a mask there? Do you not have to wear a mask? Is it optional or mandatory? And then there was the discomfort between the poll workers and the primary, and it's the unknown. That was the biggest thing. Nobody in our lifetimes have ever had to deal with this, whether you're a voter, a poll worker, or an administrator. So it was just that unknown of how to handle that. By the time the general rolled around, though, with all the advertisement going out nationwide, we had poll workers lined up waiting to work, which was fantastic.
That is fantastic. How about you, Gabrielle? Go ahead.
No, pretty similar experience. The primary, the governor basically shut down all the schools, and most of my stuff is in schools. I couldn't use what I normally would. I had several, because I have 20 cities and I have a very long county as well. And I've got an inner city, I've got a huge suburbs, and then I have a fairly decent rural area. So when we were looking at early voting, I had to find locations that were going to satisfy people being able to get on a bus, walking to, my inner city neighborhoods versus my suburban areas versus my rural. So believe it or not, some of my mayors really came out and were like, what can we do to help? So for early voting, I made the mistake in hindsight to use my office just because it was set up for COVID. I have glass. We have a walk-in, walk-out. And it was too small, but once the ball started rolling, you really couldn't do anything about it. And then we found a senior center, and they were closed. So I did have difficulties, not just for my voting centers, but everything else, the schools, the nursing homes, the churches that I were using, they didn't want anybody in there. They didn't know what was going to happen for the primary. So I ended up, our convention center was shut down because all of the conventions had said we can't come, and they couldn't do anything. They offered me that space. So that was lovely. And they gave it to us, the county. And so I was able to work with my local bus state, what our transit authority, to allow for free busing of people to vote. And we did those kind of things. And interestingly, most of my older poll workers were like, this is not going to happen. A lot of my younger ones are people who were taking care of other people. They didn't want to be exposed. So my staff automatically they're required to vote, work on election day. So it's 35 people, but I knew I needed more than that. And like I said, I had a different, interesting group of people come out of the woodwork and say, what can we do to make this work? And that was the primary. And then after that, and I did get sued for only having one physical location for election day. Actually ended up winning that suit. But then I knew that that was going to function for the general. So we did have 24 locations. We had early voting, and then we had 24 physical locations for the general, and did that based on our cities. Every city had their own center, and then we had some extras in the bigger cities that had the more urban areas, and then we had a couple extra for our people who would have to drive further in our rural areas. And after that, believe it or not, the Secretary of State, I kept turning away people. They put a note out just like Arizona and said, do you guys want to help make this process better? And I had to turn people away because I just couldn't train enough of them. And all the ones that didn't want to work in the primary came back and said, yes, we want to work. So that was a nice problem to have. But we did have some difficulties with locations. I normally have 50 locations and only had 24 because, again, a lot of them are nursing homes. They didn't want anybody in still. A lot of the schools, the governor had left it up to the principals whether you were allowed to come in and use the school or not. And so some of them said yes and some of them didn't. So it worked out in the long run, but it did really, you were always kind of modifying what was going to happen almost up to about 2 weeks before the election. And that was hard.
So in the run up to the election, on election day, did you find any issues that sort of put out provisional ballots or issues with your machines, technology issues, or anything like that, like long lines, anything that that stood out in your jurisdictions for election day?
We don't do provisionals the same way a lot of other states here in Kentucky. I mean, we try very hard to make sure that people are going to get a full ballot if we can verify that they are a proper registered voter. One of the things, and I know you're going to ask this later on, but one of the things I ended up doing just out of necessity is I had a triage table at everywhere. Voter comes up, you don't know who they are, go to the triage table. And that person had a computer in front of them. We got permission from the state to have our voter registration system on basically laptops. And we also had direct connects back to our mainframe or somebody in my office. And we literally just triage people the whole time. And what we found is we just had a lot of people who thought they had changed their address or done all these things. And that was the biggest problem. And it's the same problem. It was just expansive because so many people were coming out of the woodwork that hadn't voted in at least 8 years because they just wanted to be part of the process.
So the technology, like with electronic poll books, sort of allowed you to sort of resolve many of the potential provisional ballots by making sure the person was registered or had an address update.
Yeah, I mean, out of the amount of people that voted, we had 5 provisional ballots that were approved and the primary, and I had 10 in the general. That's very low.
How about you, Leslie?
Well, we have provisionals. We didn't have a triage table. We have a provisional table, but again, at the general, at 167,000 registered voters, only 18,000 showed up on election day. So that alone cuts down provisionals. And because we have vote centers, not polling locations, all of our provisionals in the past, prior to 2012, probably 90% of provisionals were due to voting in the wrong location. So by having our e-poll books and having vote centers, that completely went away. We also were able to change our system because of technology to show that that if your early ballot had been processed and you walked in, said, no, I still want to vote. We have to give them a ballot so they get a provisional, but we can show if it's been processed. If it has not been processed, an early ballot, their account is flagged. They get a regular ballot instead of a provisional. And then that's the one that will get tabulated. Their first ballot that was mailed to them would be canceled. Again, assuring that they only get one vote. So we did have more than 5 and 10. That's remarkable. I'm a little jealous, Gabe. We ended up total with 500 in the general, which we thought was good. But again, we don't have a whole lot just because of the way we set up and work towards the elimination of provisional ballots because they're so time consuming.
So let's shift a little bit to the mail and the absentee voting. So how was voting by mail different during the pandemic? I think you alluded to some of this, Gabrielle, the application process or, some sort of centralized system to request a ballot, dealing with the USPS. Did you see an increase in the mail voting, and how was it different with the pandemic?
So phenomenally, it was the increase. So before, you had to have an excuse to get a mail-out ballot as well, and it was very limited. When everybody was given the excuse for the primary as well as the general, basically for COVID, and really it became an early voting, and they had the option to come in or get mail-in. I literally 35,000 in the primary because there was more options to vote in person in the general. I only set out 24,000 in the general, and it was interesting because you become a mail house, but that the production of it was an interesting part, but the front end where people could request was done very well. It was done in the primary, got way better in the general, and that was people could go through, identify themselves through this portal. They had to answer so many questions, and of course, social triggers to make sure it's them. And then I would get their sticker in the mail the next day from a mail house that was exclusively used for this. And then we would send them downstairs, and we had all the pre-printed ballots and the everything to go. What was really well done was the encoded barcode. So it was scanned on the way out. So I knew exactly, that it went out, and the voters were able to track themselves because they could see when they asked for it, when it went out, and then when it come back, I would code, the barcode would let me scan it back in and know exactly what it is. What was really cool about all of that was it certainly made our checking signatures so much easier. So when the barcode would come back in, the ballot would come in and we would barcode it, it would automatically pull up that person's signature. You could automatically check right then and there. And you could say, A, I accepted it, and 2, I'm rejecting it because its signature doesn't match, or I'm gonna basically say, yes, I'm accepting it because it matches. So it gave them information that says, hey, it's been accepted. If it was rejected because the signature didn't match, it automatically sent the voter a letter that and an email, if they provided an email address in our system, that says, we have a mismatch. We need you to sign this affidavit. We need to cure your signature. There's obviously some discrepancy. What happens is a lot of voters don't realize that when their name is Anthony, and I'm looking at everything that was signed properly, they can't just sign TJ. Okay, so then I had 2, I had a bank fraud investigator as one of my people checking. She volunteered. And then I had another person who was a teacher. She taught handwriting, and she's like, this is awesome. And but they were able, for the most part, to identify. We really only had about, out of the 24,000 in the general, about 200 that we had to send letters to cure their signatures, because we either couldn't identify who they were, or they wrote a completely different name or something of that nature. And they were able to, out of that, we only ended up having about 15 that never sent in their affidavits for us to properly cure their signatures.
Before we get Leslie's take on the mail absentee process, describe to me a little bit more about this portal. And it seemed to me like this made the process of requesting ballots more efficient for your office?
So the portal, in the past, you would have to call our office or send an email and say, I'm requesting an absentee ballot. It was a really labor-intensive two-step process. I would create basically an application saying, I'm asking for this ballot, and the reason I'm asking for it, and they have to check mark, they'd have to send that application back with their signature, and then I could produce the ballot for them. Well, this just took all of that out of the way. So people could actually literally not have to call. They could do it at 11 o'clock at night. They could get on there and verify themselves and request their ballot. And in the new, and I know I might be skipping forward here, but in our new legislation, the portal has been kept. We're back to excuses, but they just mark what that excuse is. They're technically internally doing the application process. And we're on this end, then just seeing who's requested and being able to then go straight to creating the packet with the ballot and putting that into the mail. So we're not wasting as much time. It would take 2 to 3 days just to send out an application, 2 to 3 days before I came back, create the ballot packet, 2 to 3 days. And frankly, no offense to the U.S. Postal Service, but 2 to 3 days doesn't happen anymore. It's 7 easily. So that was fabulous. And I'm very happy that it's been kept. It also alleviates you needing that many people on the phones to be able to accommodate people's requests.
One other thing, I know I was going to say this was the last question on this, but the ballot tracking, you noted the intelligent barcode, and that provides so many services and options for the election administrator to track the ballots. But it seemed to be a big thing at this election that the tracking of ballots by the voter has just exploded. It's become such a demand and sort of help the voter understand where their ballot is in the process. Did you see that in Kentucky? It sounds like that was something that sort of voters became an option for voters in Kentucky.
They loved it. They loved it because they could see, okay, I got it this day. And then if they didn't see that I had sent it out in a day or two, they're like, why didn't you send me my ballot out? Now I'd be like, yeah, we started telling people and actually had them put on there, please give the clerks a couple of days because we weren't printing the labels in house. So, after people got used to it, they really liked seeing it. What I found interesting is that people were a little concerned that we were tracking and being able to deal with privacy issues with their ballot on the back end. And we had to explain that we were truly separating, once it's been done, the rest of the process that has always been in place to protect the privacy of the vote is the same. The other thing that I noticed is, this is really, truly, in my opinion, a faith and trust-based system. And it really rocked people's worlds. So a lot of the trust and faith in a lot of our systems went away. So it gave them some of that, okay, they didn't lose my stuff. I can see where things are. But on the other end, we have always allowed other people to call in for their kids, their parents, to order ballots. That has always been part of Kentucky law. And we have found that really has needs a little tweaking in the future, because you'll have people call and say, you sent me something, I didn't ask for this. But because there was this volume that they wanted people to get out and vote. So it's a great thing. I think it's awesome. I think people will always want it. They want to know where things are. They don't want the excuse that, it's in the post office. It's the post office's fault. They want to know where things are.
Yeah. Leslie, Arizona and your county, you've been doing vote by mail for a long time. How did the pandemic impact, you and your office and your voters? What did you see that happened in 2020?
Well, we saw our increase. What we saw a big dramatic change from the last presidential is we use ballot drop boxes. And we had 13 of them around the county. And the Secretary of State, with some of their CARES money, offered to buy boxes for any counties that wanted them. And we thought, well, because we're so rural, we have so many places that are so out. We said, well, we'd like 7, and got them. And then it was that scramble, because that was between the primary and general, and we got them out. Our facilities department was fantastic, and we have them at the court buildings, at the libraries, fire stations, places that have surveillance on them and that are high traffic areas. And in 2016, a third of our voters used our ballot drop boxes. In 2020, 2/3 used our drop boxes, and a lot of it had to do with the media, the USPS, and I have to brag, ours was great. We don't have as good of tracking system because our post office is small. They don't have you can track your ballot once it goes to Phoenix, because everything goes through Phoenix and then is dispersed back to us. So it goes from our post office to Phoenix, back to us. So you can see when it gets to Phoenix and goes out, when it gets to Phoenix and comes here. There's no way to track when it's here. So we were telling people, USPS actually has a portal you can sign on personally, and it'll tell you every day what's in your mailbox. So we were letting them know. That's a nationwide program. But we saw a huge increase in our ballot boxes. And again, they're very secure. They're bolted down. They have our logos on them. We had a fire suppression system put in them. That was really neat, because that was the big, what if a match gets dropped in there? So we designed little fire suppression. So that was fantastic for our voters. They just felt more confident because they knew our people were going to pick them up. It wasn't someone from the post office. It was our staff. We sent bipartisan teams out. I did get one. Well, on a Saturday, I was at a function, and someone came to me and said, I got a call last night that yesterday, which would have been Friday at noon, someone was in your drop box at one of our rural locations. Thought, oh, okay. So I left that. I drove out there. There was nothing wrong. I called my registrar on the way back, and she was laughing. She said, that was us in our county van. So then we bought these hideously bright vests for them to wear. We had some vests, but they weren't comfortable. They weren't easy. So we got these hideously bright vests that said elections, voter registration. So they were in a van and had to wear a vest when they went. We have our locks. A part of it was education. There's 2 locks on every drop box. Both of them are a different key. They're different at every drop box. So all 19 of our boxes they have their own little standalone security when it comes to being able to access them. And I've had legislators come up here to look at our boxes and try to pick them apart. I had one of them karate kick one. We doing everything we can. It's like, fine, see if you can tear them down. Have fun. And I wish we would have had some of it on video, because it would have been great to market that. Because they really
Leslie, I'm not going to try to drop kick your boxes.
Thank you. And it saved $43,000 in postage last year using drop boxes. $43,000.
So Arizona has I think it was like last time I checked, 75% of the voters might use vote by mail. And did you see an additional increase in your vote by mail because of the pandemic, or did it stay about the same? How would you characterize it?
We went up in the whole state. It didn't go up as much for us, since 80% are already on our early voting list where they automatically get that ballot. But we went up between 3 and 4%. Some of the other counties, they saw increases of 25, 30% increase. And we're also allowed here, if you're not on the they've changed the name. I keep on to say permanent early voter list. They changed to the active early voter list now, some of the last legislation. If you're not on that, you could still call and say, can you just send me an early ballot? Of course, we verify who they call in, and then we can send them no excuse. So you don't have to be on that list if you like to vote on election day. But a lot of them, the closer it got to election day, started panicking, worrying about the pandemic, worrying about crowds. So they could just call us or go through a portal. We also have a portal as well. And request that, we call them one-offs, the one-time early ballots, and we just process those in-house and send them. And something else we did just about 3 years ago is we added, please include your phone number on the affidavit envelope below their signature in case we need to contact you. And like 60% of people put their phone number on, and that's wonderful. Their contact.
It is. So what changes in the way you ran elections in 2020 do you believe will continue for your future elections, and what were temporary measures? And this is really for both of you, so whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I think Leslie's setup is kind of Kentucky's getting to that. So you already have a lot of the things that we experienced for the first time, and we just had a big omnibus election bill that got passed. It will become in law in July of this year, and saved a lot of the things that we had to do to make the elections work. And for us, the drop boxes, they were awesome. Love the drop boxes. The early voting, we now have 3 days of early no excuse voting in Kentucky. That's huge. One of those days has to be a Saturday. We have been given, because our county, we don't have a centralized system like a lot of other states where the Secretary of State kind of controls how it's done in every county. Every county here, I am the chief election official, and I get to choose how that my county looks. So they gave us the capability of how we want election day to look. And that being said, I am most probably going to have a couple of early voting locations and then have my 24 voting locations on election day. They also, the other big thing again is we're keeping the portal and the scanning and the barcodes so that people can track their mail. We did go back to excuse voting for mail-in, and I think the intention of that was to make sure that people weren't just ordering ballots for other people. So they still will be able to use the portal, but they will have to have a reason for being out, not having to use that. The other couple of things that were that were different was, we are now going to be able to better utilize our poll workers. And what I mean by that, it was always very specific that you had to have a Democrat and Republican and you had parity in all of your locations. I'm going to be able to use them in a much better fashion that if I have somebody who's an independent, because a lot of my poll workers 1 year changed. And I'm like, oh, so now I can't use this person because they're an excellent trained poll worker, but they changed their party affiliation. So now that's different. I'm able to continue to use those people in a better fashion. And so it gives me a little bit more flexibility on what election day is going to look like so that it works for my county, because what works for my county may not work for somebody else. And I'm pretty happy about those kind of things. But those are the main keeps.
Leslie, how about Arizona? What will continue in the future, and what was just temporary, if anything?
Well, we're the same as Kentucky. We're run from the county. We're bottom up state. We're not a top down state. So, which is good because our demographics are so different. Coconino County has to helicopter equipment to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I don't have to do that. So, fortunately we follow the same laws, the same procedures manual, but our policies and procedures, some of them have to vary because of just demographics. One thing that we did do is we worked with our sheriff's department for we call them VIPs, or volunteers in protection. We had them helping out with line monitoring and spacing at both of our early voting sites. I have 2 offices, so we had them there. That we think we'll probably continue to keep. We will keep our sanitation stations. Hopefully we won't have to have PPEs. We're not going to be dealing with this again. Another policy change that we got done at the county level during the primary is being allowed to use county employees on election day or election night, and they didn't have to take PTO or their vacation time, and they still got paid the stipend that we give all the other poll workers. And it had been turned down a few years before, right before my time. And I went back, because I don't hire those poll workers. It's the elections director that answers to the board. But we went back and said, we need people who are engaged, who are a little more, I don't want to say dedicated, but if they're county employees, it's important to them. And they got to make a little bit extra. They got to see what we did. So not only the people that helped during early voting from other departments, we were able to pay employees, of course, if the supervisors approved, to work on election day. And that's a permanent change in our policy. And that was great. And we can put those in as like our election day technicians, because most of them are a little more technically savvy. And we even found that our voters were a little more comfortable knowing that there was a county employee at every location. We have 25 vote centers. And they just felt that there was better oversight. They might have been from the facilities department, but they trained, they got the same online and in-person training. And they were going to keep that and continue that. And that's such a nice perk for our employees, because we don't get to give them a lot of extra stuff being a government entity. So that's a definite key. The things that I hope not to do is face a pandemic again and have to deal with people that are scared, our PPEs, getting PPE supplies in. But a lot of things that we did as precaution and out of necessity turned out to be great changes that we will continue.
One other thing I mentioned is my triage table. That was incredible. People felt like even though they weren't just able to go forward, they weren't being just sent away. They were able to go someplace and really see what happened and fix what happened, even if they didn't get to vote because they didn't properly move from one. And Kentucky has a lot of different deadlines if you move from one county to another, and sometimes that prohibits them from getting a ballot. And of course, that's when, and at the triage table is where the provisional ballots were dealt with. So that in the long run, if there had to be something, they were actually, all of that was contained in one area. And I'm actually going to be expanding that to the point where they're going to be able to, by having their own laptops and all the things there, it's almost as if they're at the office. And those will be, of course, more specialized people from my office, representatives that are my employees. And it made a world of difference because they didn't feel like they were just saying, nope, you can't vote. Nope, you didn't do it right. And part of that came out of something that you all have as a policy that we had during the pandemic, which has gone away. And that is the ability for them to order a mail-in ballot and then come in on election day and turn it in. That made, I had 4,000 people do that. And it was so hard to track. And it made a lot of people not trust the system because you didn't have a lot of time from when they were handing you the ballot to cancel it to voting. And so a lot of people were like, how can you prove to me that they didn't vote twice? So we all, nonpartisan across the board, County Clerk said, we're going to give them a time frame for them to cancel from ordering to that, but they can't do it after the 7 days because we need time to be able to do that. So they've got 7 days before the election to switch, and after that, no switch. But we also have the law that says that if you fail to get your first ballot and you notify us in a proper amount of time, you're going to get a second one. So there's going to be those weird situations that don't fall perfectly in those rules, but for the most part, we will always err on the side of making sure the voter votes. And but we felt like it was too chaotic. People lost a lot of trust in that exchange, and so we allow it now. We just put a deadline on the ability to do it.
You said something huge there, that our job is to administer good elections and tabulate votes. We do everything we can for the benefit of the voter. And that's what we do. We're not here to keep them from voting. We're here to encourage their voting and make it as good a process as we possibly can within the guidelines of our laws.
So the last question I have for you is really, I think most election administrators think about this after every election, is what are the areas of improvement that you are working on for 2022 or 2024 after this election? Obviously, it's a little bit of an anomaly being a pandemic year, but what are one or two things that you took away from this election is like, our office is going to be working on this over the next couple of years?
I'll jump in. I'm working on my street lists and making sure that, because I have 20 cities, I have to code people in school districts and city elections and all that stuff. So making sure our data and that we keep on top of making sure our data is very clean. That makes the e-poll book experience so much better. We got new voting equipment because we had an opportunity to do that. But one of my biggest things at this point is we have to have, and we're working with our state board of elections on this, better reporting. It is really hard to sometimes explain what I call election math to reporters. When you say you sent out 24,000 ballots and you have people canceling them, the system would just say cancel, but not why. They need to know the why. They want to know why you sent out 24, but only 20,000 came back. I mean, you just need that crisp, that these numbers match, that there's nobody's taking, and the transparency of these are how my equipment works. When you saw that picture in Georgia where somebody took a stack of ballots, they ran it through the machine and then they put it back on the machine. For me, my goal moving forward is I'm having town halls. Everybody needs to see my equipment. They need to know what it can and cannot do, that it's separated from the internet, that educational process for the voter to put trust back into the system. As much as that's a time consuming and extra thing that was normally not something we do here in Kentucky, I think is crucial moving forward always, because any changes make people nervous and they need to know what that effect is on the end result. And then they can question it and hopefully get a better understanding of how it's a good thing and works for them. And then they put trust back in the system, because it's a great, awesome thing that we have the right to vote here. And I hate for that to be diminished.
Yeah, transparency, very important. How about you, Leslie? What are the things you may be working on the next couple of years?
Very much the same. Education, education, education. We started a program called Follow Your Ballot Tour. And we bring in 12 people at a time, and they end up getting a ballot. They vote it. It's a cookie ballot. It's the one I use in the high schools when I do high school classes. And they use our Dropbox. We show them the chain of custody. They walk through everything with us. They watch individually. They go to some of my staff and they verify their signatures, show how we look at their signature on screen, then how it's transferred to the elections department. They separate everything. They see the tabulation. They see it's all a closed network. That's been good. And with the pandemic, we weren't able to do that. So I think we have close to 100 people already on a waiting list to start those back up again, because you can talk and talk and talk, but when they get to touch it, really seems to make a big difference. And of course, one person likes it and they tell a minimum of 5. So those have been really good, and we're going to pick those back up again. And then our maintenance, we're part of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. We also have a national change of address system. We get about 300 hits a week on moves within the county. So it gives us a jump on sending out our NAVR notices on change of address. And then we started an electronic return so that we don't get trays of return mail. It comes back in a spreadsheet. And in fact, right now, my little genius that had figured all this out and put it all together is working with our Treasurer's Department to try to help them on especially the electronic return. And we're constantly trying to improve that. And right now, it used to take a couple of people 2 to 3 days, takes one person 3 hours. So when we get something back, it comes in on a spreadsheet from the post office. Matt has it coded, hits it on the screen. It pulls up the person's account. We can say it was returned and instantly get a hold of those people, say, hey, we got this back. Of course, we told everybody but you that we moved. We're able to update their record. We have them go on, update their address. And within that 27-day period, we've got a ballot out. It's come back. We've notified the people and got them back another ballot, not have to say, well, it's late. You're going to have to come in on election day. So we're just going to continue to improve those processes. And we're having our Arizona Association of Counties convention in November, and he's actually teaching that to some of our other counties as well. So we're always working on the postage safety and time. So probably education, that, and of course security. And we're always working on cyber and physical security. We got our DHS, they did their inspection. They do an assessment, physical and cyber, and then we got the grants in 2018, and we were able to do a lot of physical and firewall protection, and we will hopefully be able to do more of that going forward.
This sounds great. Well, thank you. Thank you both for joining me today. Leslie Hoffman, County Recorder, Yavapai County, Arizona, and Gabrielle Summe from County Clerk of Kenton County, Kentucky. Thank you both for joining me. I learned a lot today, and I hope our viewers learned a lot too as we look back at the 2020 election and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.